here. I'd like to introduce someone who I've known, I want to say now for 15 years, maybe more, maybe less. Captain Brian Bearden, he's the current chief engineer for Guam EPA. He's served in many capacities since I've known him, up in Saipan in Alaska. I've, he's a licensed professional engineer in CNMI in Guam and maybe even Alaska. I'm not sure, but I know he's licensed in Guam and CNMI. He's one of those engineers that knows how to dig into the details and he knows how to see the bigger picture. So that's a gift that I think he has, and it's wonderful to be working with him, collaborating on him on many different aspects of regulations, water systems, stormwater systems, wastewater systems. He's very acknowledged and experienced in all of it. So I guess without any further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Captain Brian Bearden, professional engineer. Brian?
Hey, thanks, Ken. Very kind introduction there. Joe, are you going to share my slides or do I need to share them? Okay. I'm going to turn off my camera just like Karine. I think we have everyone in my building is watching this right now, so I think that's slowing our connection down a bit. This is going to be a brief presentation. I'll make up for the extra time we had on the US EPA presentation from Karine, because that was, in my opinion, a very, very useful dialogue there. And ours will be pretty short. Could you please move to the next slide? So back in December, Public Law 35-115 here in Guam was passed. And I'd really like to recognize the presence of Senator Sabina Perez and her staffers that are on the call today. They were a huge part of getting this done. They did an enormous amount of really high detail work to dig through this really large bill and find all sorts of details that we had perhaps had some mistakes in and such. And they were able to fix a lot of stuff, and just getting it done was enormous. And quick apology to everybody else. This is a Guam related presentation only, but we have a lot of folks from Guam, so we decided to go ahead and go through this. So the rest of this presentation, I'll give you a briefing, brief briefing on what all this includes. So next slide, please. So the new law combined both revisions to our original safe drinking water statute and also our new safe drinking water regulations. The statute itself had not been touched since perhaps the 1970s. The last addition to the statute was called the Guam Lead Ban Act, which was issued in the 90s. It was Chapter 53A. This new statute revision made a lot of changes to the old statute. And in addition to that, it combined the Guam Lead Ban Act provisions into the main safe drinking water statute and moved a lot of the detail off to the regulations. Some of the things that were included in the new statute were enforcement provisions that have completely changed and been updated. This includes higher fines. It includes the ability for Guam EPA to sue in court. It includes also criminal penalties, up to 1 year in prison. Oh, thanks. I forgot to ask for that. It increases the violation fines from $5,000 per violation per day up to $32,500. That number there is not correct, per violation per day. And that's an up to amount. Your typical smaller violation would not be that high. It would be for the most egregious violations of the act. It does add the ability to sue for penalties and damages, which we did not have prior to this. And it adds criminal penalties of up to 1 year imprisonment plus criminal fines of up to $32,500 per violation per day. It also allows the agency to develop regulations that would charge fees for a wide variety of services to help run our program. It also authorizes Guam EPA to create new regulations, which we have not created yet, for a number of things, including but not limited to bottled water companies, water vending machines, water haulers, the tanker trucks that deliver potable water, rainwater catchment systems, which is something that we intend to get into at least as part of public water systems. We are not limited by the statute from going into individual rainwater catchment systems, but at this time we don't really intend to do anything about those other than make sure that they have proper backflow prevention included so that they don't contaminate the larger water system. and also includes some provisions that allow us to regulate the safety and security of public water systems, and also has some prohibited actions, including tampering with a public water system or unauthorized access to a water system, which were not in the previous rules and regulations or statute. Next slide. So the Lead Ban Act provisions, and I want to separate this from the talk that Karine gave. This is a little bit different, although there are some, it is part of the federal Safe Drinking Water Act lead provisions, but this is mostly a unique to Guam provision that allows Guam to regulate the sale, importation, and installation of plumbing products that might contain lead, and for us to have our own Guam authority to enforce against that lead-free requirement of the federal rules. Again, like I mentioned, it takes some of the old implementation rules out of the 1996 Guam rule law and moves that into the regulations. And it really, the things that are unique to Guam that you probably won't find anywhere else in the US that I know of is that we have some requirements on building permitting and building occupancy, which I'm sure the Guam folks here are very familiar with, related to this Lead Ban Act. The building occupancy requirements especially have been updated, and those previously required folks, in order to get occupancy approval from the Department of Public Works in Guam, to obtain a lead sample from each tap in that building that might provide potable water. So it's typically the kitchen faucets and the bathroom faucets, and have that analyzed by a certified laboratory. And if it came up above the US EPA 15 parts per billion action level, we would require mitigation action, usually replacing of that fixture and then resampling. We have now changed that rule to allow contractors to just prove to us that they use lead-free, certified lead-free products. They can provide that to us in the form of the packaging. They can have that verified by a Guam EPA inspector by going on site and verifying that the products are marked with the proper lead-free certification marks if they are. But regardless, this provides a new process that should shave the amount of time and expense off the occupancy process considerably. In the meantime, Guam EPA will focus a lot more on enforcing this at the upper end of the importation chain and making sure that stores are only selling certified lead-free products. And as we found over the last 2 years in doing our store inspections, there are still stores on Guam that are importing non-certified products from other countries that do not meet US standards. In addition to that, those changes, the new law and regulations also gives Guam EPA a lot more enforcement actions against the stores and importers. We may confiscate, we may order the destruction or return shipment of non-conforming products. And we can also, again, levy any of those penalties up to and including the criminal penalties that were included in the new statute. Next slide, please. So the regulations that were included with the new public law are a complete updating of our previous regulations. The previous regulations go back to 2005, and what they were is they were just a blanket adoption of the federal regulations, the federal safe drinking water rules. And the last date that had been adopted was the July 1st, 2003 edition of the Code of Federal Regulations. So that is now updated to the complete adoption of the July 1st, 2019 edition of the Code of Federal Regulations. The new rules are numbered so that they match the CFR, so that it reduces confusion for everybody. Public water systems, people who attend US EPA trainings can now just very quickly cross-reference that to the Guam regulations. It just, all we did was add a number 6 in front of each of those sections. The new regulations, as I mentioned, included these new local Guam Lead Ban Act revisions. And because we adopted the July 1st, 2019 CFR, it included all the new federal rules since 2003. Unfortunately, except for the lead and copper rule revisions, which just came out this week. So we'll get to that later. Next slide, please. Some of those new rules that were added that were not in the Guam rules include some of the real big ones, really the whole meat and potatoes of drinking water regulation, the groundwater rule and the revised total coliform rule being the biggest ones. Those still applied in Guam. It's just that Guam had no direct authority to enforce those. Those were only enforceable by US EPA until now. Now we can enforce these ourselves. But that does not mean that we have primacy yet, and that's a different subject we can talk about. The new rules also include the stage 2 disinfection byproduct requirements rules, the enhanced treatment for cryptosporidium, that's part of the surface water treatment rule set, and also the initial distribution system evaluations, which is also part of that. And as well as a number of other things. The federal drinking water rules have changed quite a bit since 2003, and it's good that we're now up to date. Next rule, or next slide, please. A little bit for the Guam folks on how we will be implementing the Guam Lead Ban Act. As I mentioned already, we've adopted the new federal definition of lead-free, and we've adopted the latest third-party lead-free certification standards as being allowable. In our previous rules, we only said that it had to meet the NSF requirement for lead-free. Our new rules adopt the latest NSF standard. It adopts the California House bill, I forget the number exactly, and also I don't have it in front of me, but it's not ASTM, but it's the mechanical engineering standard that includes lead-free. We've also clarified what building permit requirements are, and that requires some new language that must be a part of all plumbing plans that we approve for building permits, and that language is provided now on our website. The occupancy permit requirements themselves are now streamlined. Like I said, they can go much faster. People use the certification requirement instead of the lead sampling. But if they do continue to use the lead sampling, which was something we kept in the rules, it now is much more clear on what must be done if that limit is exceeded, and it requires the replacement of that fixture. Our staff, even if they do continue to do lead sampling, if a contractor continues to request that instead of the new method, our staff will now be inspecting the products that are installed. And if they are not a certified product, they will order them to be removed and not take the sample. So we've gotten rid of that as sort of an excuse that contractors had used in the past to get away with installing products that were not certified. So this no longer allows you to get away with that. And the fees have gone up to $35 an hour for that inspection service. But again, a contractor can avoid that if they bring us their packaging to prove they use certified products. Next slide. So the last few slides here, and like I said, I'm going to keep this quick, are just going to be how does this affect you if you work in our different industries that are represented by AWWA. So if you work for a public water system, this does not affect you all that much, this new law, because the 2019 federal rules that we adopted were already in effect. We were already not enforcing them, but we were keeping you, holding you to those requirements. And if you failed to meet them, we were giving notices of violation. It's just that the final enforcement authority can now be taken up by Guam EPA instead of US EPA. Penalties, again, have increased. That would be one difference. Our objective in our drinking water program is to work closely with public water systems to avoid enforcement. We like to be ahead of the game. As most of you guys know, we try to give you advance warning of sample requirements and other deadlines that you have to meet. We don't want to end up in an enforcement situation, but in case we do, the new penalties would apply. And then one of the bigger items, which I can get into in a little while here, is that we can also now issue what we call the interim action levels. This is a part of the actual statute revisions for unregulated contaminants. And toward the end of this presentation, I'll explain a little bit more about how that works and what our plans are moving forward. Next slide. For the engineers on the call, the way this would affect you at this point, it doesn't really change any of our existing authorities that require review and approval of designs. You still have to go through our office for any changes to a public water system for engineering review. The federal rules, the new federal rules that we adopted were already being applied, so it won't change the way that we review our plans. The biggest difference really is in plumbing plans. If you're turning in building permit applications that include plumbing, your plumbing sheet at some point one of those sheets must include the mandatory language as in the form of notes, and that was required in the law, and that is available as a download on our website. Just that language only that you can cut and paste. We don't need to see the regulatory numbering in there. You can number it as you want, but the exact language has to be reproduced to comply with the regulations. Next slide. And if you're a builder, if you're a contractor, again, those plumbing plans must contain those mandatory plumbing notes. We've given contractors 1 month to get that implemented. Or not 1 month. We've given them until March 1st, a little bit over 1 month. In the meantime, we're putting it in as permit conditions on our approval letters. But after March 1st, we will start returning plans if they don't contain those notes, and they'll have to be resubmitted to us with those notes. Again, occupancy permits, this is going to be the biggest difference. Right now, I would say that our lead sampling program under the previous law adds about a 2-week or more process to all occupancy permits. In theory, if a contractor follows the rules and keeps their packaging and is able to show them to our office when they bring it into our one-stop center, they should be able to get that drinking water approval of their occupancy at the same time they bring that product in, or that application in. Most important note, there's a Save Your Plumbing product packaging. So that's the boxes that your fixtures came in, the tags from your supply hoses, all of that. Again, for a contractor, if they do elect to still continue to do the lead sampling, and we have verified that their products are at least most of the ones that we can see are still lead-free or certified lead-free, and they run a sample and it exceeds the sampling results, we can then order that contractor to remove and replace those fittings and fixtures. Where in the past, it was a little bit hazy what our rules required. Next slide. So for stores that sell plumbing products, again, the federal requirements still applied. It is still illegal to sell non-lead-free certified products. It was illegal before, it's illegal now. The Guam lead-free requirements now match the federal rules, and Guam can enforce up to those rules now locally. The enforcement actions that we can take against a plumbing store that sells products that do not meet our requirements is that we can confiscate and destroy the products that are being sold. We can order the contractor to return those to their point of origin or to destroy them and prove that they've destroyed them on island. We can charge penalties up to $32,500 per day per violation. And again, that number on the slide is incorrect. And in cases where a store owner or importer knowingly commits violations of this rule, that could include, Guam EPA could pursue criminal penalties through the Attorney General, including fines and up to 1 year of imprisonment. So next slide, please. So what's next? And this is where I would like to answer Senator Perez's question. The new regulations, or the new rule, the new statute includes this provision for interim action levels. And we had talked about this while we were developing the new statute with the Senator's office. We do intend to move forward quickly on an interim action level for PFAS and PFOA. Those are the two most common contaminants. We see mostly PFOS in the water here in Guam. We haven't decided yet exactly what level we're going to shoot for, but it's likely that we will base this on the US EPA health advisory level, which is a 70 parts per trillion level for both of those, for individually. The process by which we would implement an interim action level is there's a public process written into the law, but it's not the AAA regulation process. So we would not be issuing regulations. The law requires us to publish a risk assessment and our proposed interim action level and what the actions are that we would require. So as just a hypothetical, what we would maybe be doing for PFAS and PFOA would be to publish the US EPA's health advisory level document, which is a risk assessment, and probably a brief cover letter with that explaining that, Guam EPA proposes to adopt the 70 parts per trillion level, and that the action taken would be, for example, for public water systems to not serve water to their customers that exceeds the interim action level. And then once that's put out for public comment, there's a certain amount of time that has to remain out for public comment. Guam EPA has to hold a public hearing. Guam EPA must address comments received during the public comment process. And then the Guam EPA Board of Directors must vote on approval of the interim action level in a public Guam EPA Board of Directors meeting. So that's how that process would work. The next big task that Guam EPA will be working on over the next year is what we call the Part 2 of the Safe Drinking Water Regulations. So as I mentioned, the current regulations that we adopted were just a blanket adoption by reference of the federal rules. It does not include a lot of the Guam specific stuff that we need to have. We do have some old rules. They're under 22 GAR Chapter 7 Part 2. These standards for design standards for waterworks. Those still exist. They're a little bit out of date. There's some things we need to change. And so that will be updated. And then in addition to that, we will be adding in a whole host of additional miscellaneous items that have not been in Guam EPA's rules, but really need to be. And we have draft regulations that are under development now. And that will include material and chemical additive standards, probably adopting NSF 60 and 61 requirements so that becomes codified. It will require rules for water haulers, rainwater catchments, probably just if they're used as a component of a public water system. And we do have some proposals we've seen over the last 2 years where folks have wanted to include those into large building projects. Water system safety and a whole host of other things as well. And so that's what's coming up over the next year. I want to try to close this out now for questions. There's no more slides, I believe. Maybe Ken could get back on and we could answer some questions if there are any. If there's not, then great.
All right. Hey, Brian, thank you. Great job. Great job. Nice segue from Corinne Lee's presentation to yours. I'm searching through the chat now. Okay. Trying to see. Okay, here we go. I'm not seeing any specific questions. Any one of our 78 participants, if you have one, go ahead. Brian, I have a question for you. It's more just a.
I've got it. Okay. I'll interrupt you though, King, because I did receive questions as a direct message to me from.
Okay.
I can't read who sent it to me, but let me go ahead and read it. So it asks for bottled water companies, will that include the making of ice, which some do? Well, first, let me just say with bottled water companies, those are regulated right now by the Department of Public Health and Social Services, I think by Bureau of Environmental Health. So we are not going to be overlapping anything that DEH currently regulates. So we're going to be working very closely with them. I think that some of the rules we were looking at were some of the gaps in terms of monitoring and such. So we're not really sure yet what we're going to do with that. We have some ideas, but that's something we're going to be working on collaboratively with DPHSS, DEH. Okay. Let's see. We have a question from Emmanuel John. Exchange. Is he? I'm not sure what you're asking there, John. You're asking about the method 533 for, is that for lead or is that for PFAS? I don't recognize, off the top of my head, I don't know what that is. But you're asking if the Guam Navy and GWA labs have that existing technology or instrumentation. I would say probably not. Most of those methods are sent off island to off island certified laboratories. We do have the ability to do lead sampling through WERI lab. But most of the chemicals such as PFAS and PFOA, those are done off island. Ken, what was your question?
Well, let's table mine because a few other questions came in. I'll just read them out loud here. One is from Senator Perez. Are there risk assessments that would support a lower interim action levels for PFAS?
Yes, there have been risk assessments performed by other states, New Jersey, for example, that we could consider, and we've talked about that before, that support a lower level. Um, it's something we need to work on in this public process. Like I said, what we would try to do. The only thing I would throw out there as a regulator is that the selection of level could also have economic consequences, right? So right now we have GWA, um, the military's water systems. They've all voluntarily taken wells offline that exceed the EPA number, and they're all working on or have installed already filtration systems that can get the water served down to below the EPA number. I don't know what would happen if, say, we went with a lower number, if that would require more wells to go offline, or different types of filtration systems to be installed, or have to replace the ones that they've already purchased. So those are things that we'll have to consider, and that the public will be able to comment on as we move into that process.
Great. A few other questions here from Rick Zimmer. EPA PFAS HAs date back to 2016. Is it possible that Guam EPA may establish HAs and then go back to update if EPA adds more PFAS compounds or lowers the 2016 HAs? Health advisory, is that what that HA means?
Yeah, the health advisory level. So, well, this interim action level, again, it's a pretty flexible provision that Guam EPA can exercise. So if things change, we would be able to pretty rapidly adapt to that and change that interim action level. And then until the time comes that EPA issues a new MCL that we would adopt, that would then in theory override that. Or unless Guam EPA were to adopt a lower level as a direct MCL, which would be very difficult to do just because the level of, the degree of proof might be more difficult.
And then we got is Guam EPA looking at PFAS and wastewater? Also from Rick Zimmer.
Guam EPA is not really doing that in terms of the fact that we don't have any wastewater effluent limits right now for PFAS, right? I know that it's been looked at. I know GWA has done some sampling. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what was found. I know they looked at what was coming into the wastewater system, and I think what was leaving. But until we receive something more along the lines of a water quality standard for surface water, it would be difficult to do much with that. We would need to have some standard to enforce against. If that answers your question.
Yeah. Then Jewel Mendoza from Guam EPA just says, yeah, no labs conduct test beds at 533. They're all sent off island, just as you confirmed. We got Caesar here.
I received okay, go ahead.
Caesar, so you mentioned briefly about backflow prevention a while ago. Any updates on full implementations, like requirements for periodic testing certification? Oh, it's kind of not exactly related, but you did mention it. I do remember that. I guess.
Yeah. And we do have the authority under the new statute to issue rules about backflow prevention programs. And the regulations, the Part 2 regulations will include that. I know that the big water systems already have backflow preventer programs that they're either developing or are already implementing, and that will require that periodic certification. I know that one of the big challenges, and it's anywhere out in the Pacific Islands, even up in Alaska where I was, is to find the certified testers that are available. It's relatively easy to train and certify drinking water system operators. Backflow prevention testing is for some reason a much more difficult test for people to pass. I've worked before trying to get people to training and get them to pass the test, and it's considerably more difficult. It also includes a lot of testing equipment that has to be purchased to do the tests. So that's one of the challenges. And I know, and maybe someone from GWA can answer that, but I know GWA has been working real hard on that to develop their own program, which would cover, most of Guam. And you see thousands of those backflow preventers out there on the commercial establishments when you drive by, and it'll be great to start getting those tested. I see quite a few of them leaking occasionally.
Yeah, I can attest.
What's next?
I'm not seeing anything next, and it looks like we're right on schedule now. So, Brian, any closing remarks you want to offer before we move on?
Yeah, just one real quick one is that, about 2 or 3 years ago, when the ABC water and wastewater operator testing, the test specifications changed. They removed regulation and training and test questions on regulations and laws. And so one of the things that I want to do as an AWWA officer here in HIWPS is, and I think all of our AWWA officers agree, is to start implementing a lot more regulation training to make sure that our public water system members and regulated community really get to know that. And that's something we'll be working on. I think that today was an example of that as a quarterly training event to try to focus on regulations. We may start reaching out with some additional training, maybe separate, that would be more in depth, but it's something we really want to focus on because it's no longer part of operator certification training or study requirements. So it really falls on now on us, the regulators, to try to get that training out to the public. That's it. So thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank